Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. 2 years ago, voters in the 15th Council District in Central Bronx, a district that includes the communities of Belmont, Fordham, Tremont, and East Tremont, elected this young member to the New York City Council. I'm not sure, though, that at the time they thought this young man, Richie Torres, would then become one of the council's most important leaders. But he did, and he's my guest today. And welcome.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
I'm so delighted to have you. Were you born a political being?
Growing up, my aunt would tell me that you talk too much, you should be an attorney.
That's interesting.
But in the beginning, I had dreams of becoming a teacher. I would teach my cousins history and mathematics.
Yeah.
And then in high school, I engaged in a form of legal debate known as moot court, which was modeled after the Q&A structure of the Supreme Court. So you would deliver an argument in the face of rigorous and relentless questioning from judges. And in the final round of my moot court competition, I had an opportunity to argue before 3 judges of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. So it was a life-changing experience for a young high school student from the inner cities.
Yeah.
But then my first introduction into politics came with the CORO program. So CORO is a program that specializes in leadership development. And I was part of the inaugural class.
How did they find you, or how did you find them?
I believe my law coach encouraged me to apply.
Where did you go to high school?
Lehman High School, which at the time had 5,000 students, but it's been watered down.
Yeah. So you applied, and that was it, huh? You got in.
And then
Or they
through
courted
CORO,
you.
I was able to secure an internship in the Deputy Mayor's Office of Economic Development and Rebuilding. I studied community benefit agreements, so learned at an early age the importance
How old were you?
It was 2003 or 2004, so it was 11 years ago.
Oh, boy. So you were what, 16 years old?
It was an early
something?
start in politics,
Yeah.
15, 14.
Yeah. That's great, and then you just liked it.
That was the beginning of the trajectory that ultimately led to my career in the city council. And from there, I became an intern in the Attorney General's office, my local council member, Jimmy Vaca. I then eventually became his housing director. And from there, I ran for the city council with his support.
What do you like about it?
What I love about politics is, first, I prefer to be a generalist. You know, if you're a doctor, you can only focus on medicine. If you're a teacher, you can only focus on education. When you're an elected official, you can focus on every aspect of human welfare. So it's just endlessly intellectually stimulating. And you can experience both the macro and the micro. So one day I'm in a public housing apartment inspecting mold growth, and the next day I'm holding a city council hearing, cross-examining the NYCHA chair about mold in public housing.
Yeah.
And so to be able to experience the macro and the micro, constituent services and policy in the span of a week or a day is fulfilling.
But it's also undercurrent. Why are you doing it? Is it because you personally like it, or do you have a mission?
I am a man on a mission, and I start with the premise that government can and should play a role in improving people's lives. And I am a product of public institutions. I would not be here but for public education, but for public transit, but for our public hospital system, our public housing system. I grew up in public housing. And so preserving those institutions as the foundation for upward mobility is the central cause of my life.
So, and you're very interested in passing along that passion to younger people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am. I feel, civic engagement is a little like learning a language. The best time to do it is when you're young.
Yeah.
It's a habit that you should cultivate at a young age so that it remains with you.
Yeah.
And I've seen the destructive impact that the crisis of civic engagement has on our society. I do come from a borough that has one of the lowest rates of voter participation. My district, the last 2 state senators are in jail. The assembly member who represented the western part of my district had to resign after wiretapping his colleagues. My district historically has been represented by the Rivera dynasty, Jose Rivera and his son Joel Rivera and Naomi Rivera.
And before him, there was another dynasty.
Exactly. So 20 years of dynastic leadership. And then in the southern region, we had 2 assembly members who had to resign after being arrested for bribery. So, I represent a district that has only known absentee elected leadership, corruption, scandal, dynastic politics. And I think part of the problem is low voter turnout. is that corruption thrives on low voter turnout.
So, but also then the corruption does it cause the low voter turnout?
It's mutually reinforcing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you win?
Because people become disenchanted. I remember when I was knocking on
Exactly.
doors.
Yeah.
I represent a district where maybe 165,000 residents, maybe 60,000 are registered Dems, but only 6,000 vote. And I could knock on 6,000 doors. And when I would knock on doors, a number of people would tell me that in the 30 or 40 years I've been living in the neighborhood, I've never had a public official or a candidate for public office knock on my door. And that's tragic. It's painful. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is that probably in a district like mine, my youth was an asset rather than a liability.
Yeah.
I think in most cases it would have been a liability.
But you were a new face.
People saw that you're too young to be corrupted. You're so young that you can distance yourself from the failed and corrupt politics of the past.
So what was it? There was a vacancy.
There was a vacancy, yeah.
And you just decided why not?
My mentor, who was the chief of staff for Council Member Jimmy Vaca, as well as the council member himself, encouraged me to run.
Let's have his name so he gets a little credit.
And Councilman Vaca and Jeff Lynch. His name is Jeff Lynch, and both of them thought that I could make a transformative difference in politics. That I had the talent and the moral character, and that the Bronx can benefit from an infusion of new, young, dynamic energy.
So there were 5. How many candidates?
Originally 9. I think it ultimately whittled down to 5, but it was no shortage of drama. So my main opponent had the same exact name as the outgoing incumbent. The incumbent was Joel Rivera. My opponent was Joel Rivera.
That's so interesting.
He led people to believe that he was the council member. And so,
he's part of the dynasty that ruled the Bronx.
The
original Joel.
The real Joel Rivera.
Yeah.
Right? The fake Joel Rivera.
Right.
On television, I accused him of political identity theft. But it was an entertaining race.
Yeah.
And
Did you have trouble raising money?
I had relationships. And our campaign finance system rewards small donations.
It does. It makes it possible, really, to have this kind of thing happen.
If I had been running for the state senate or the assembly, then I would have had a much rougher road to elected office.
So you knocked on doors of every registered voter or every favorable voter, voters who have voted before?
The habitual voters, so the prime voters, the double primes, the triple primes. I can never knock on the door of 60,000 people. Mm-hmm. You have to identify those who vote habitually in every primary and in every general election.
So you get a feeling that you're really independent when you can run against all these people and get elected yourself. You don't feel that you have to consult with a Bronx County organization if there still is one. Is there one?
Yes, we have a Bronx County organization.
Yeah.
You want to have a working relationship with everyone, mm-hmm. because even though I have strongly held progressive principles, there is a value to pragmatism. There is a value to developing a working relationship so that you can leverage those relationships to advance the policy causes that you care about deeply. If you're an antagonist of every powerful interest in politics, you're going to have a short career or a largely ineffective one.
But what interested me is that you took a position for the speaker before you could vote for her. You had just been elected, but you weren't yet installed in the city council. So that immediately, it seemed to me, put you in this category of being independent.
It did, but it had less to do with opposition to the county organization and more to do with my vision of how the council should function. So Melissa was the only candidate the speaker was the only candidate running on a platform of rules reform. Mm-hmm. And for me, the greatest freedom that I have is freedom of conscience, mm-hmm. freedom of thought. I want to be able to think freely, to speak my mind, to vote on the best interest of my constituents without fear of retaliation from the speaker. And the speaker committed to putting in place rules reform that would protect my freedom of thought and conscience. Mm-hmm. And that to me was the overriding issue. It had nothing to do with antagonism.
Politics, and you couldn't even, who cares really in a way? Yeah. I don't know. I always had the theory, when in doubt, vote your conscience. Always, the conscience is it's the basic ingredient, isn't it? So tell me what.
And if I cannot vote my conscience, then I have no business being in elected office to begin. I don't want to be in a world where I'm simply
just
following orders from the top. I want to be able to do what I believe is right. Do I have to compromise every so often? We all do, because we live in an imperfect world. We have to accept it as we find it. But fundamentally, I want to be able to do what I believe is right for my constituents.
And you won't mind going to your constituents and really trying to not only to consult with them and know them, but also to educate them. I mean, that's an equally important thing, it seems to me.
And disagree with them
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
feel strongly about a subject. I feel like one problem we have in politics is that there is a tendency to be condescending toward the people. And I feel like people are much smarter than we give them credit for. And if you speak to them like the intelligent adults they are, and if you make rational arguments, I think they will respect you in the end, even if they continue to disagree with you.
Yeah. Do you think the voters in the Republican primary are so smart? I don't know.
I mean,
I don't want to take us off on a.
I think my first instinct is to question
Yeah.
their judgment with candidates like Donald Trump and
Yeah.
Ben Carson, but I would never presume
They
to
don't-
judge
yeah.
that which I do not know, and I don't know the voters.
Right.
I don't know the values that drive them. So who am I to judge them or to dismiss them? I'd rather learn more than simply caricature them as stupid.
So tell me about your district.
So I
Yes.
represent something of a tale of two cities because the district has considerable institutional wealth. It's the cultural district of the Bronx. I have the Botanical Gardens, the Bronx Zoo, Fordham Road, which is the Times Square of the Bronx,
I know.
Arthur Aviolotto, Italy, which
Yeah.
is an iconic
Great.
commercial district, some of the best Italian cuisine. And the cultural institutions function as a feeder into Arthur Avenue. And we have Fordham University.
You have a great district.
But at the same time, I have one of the highest rates of poverty in the city, the highest rates of diabetes, hunger. And so there's something of a tale of two cities. There's Fordham, the university, with its gorgeous campus and green spaces, and then there's Fordham, the neighborhood, which is ground zero for inequality and poverty in our city.
It's, people don't talk about the poor anymore. It's the middle class. Have you noticed that?
To the mayor's credit, he does speak about
Yeah.
the poor.
Yeah.
And that's why he's so controversial among the elites in our
Right.
city. The
Yeah.
elites despise him because he speaks
poor.
explicitly on behalf of the poor. And he's taking a political risk because the tragic fact is that many members of the urban poor vote in low numbers.
Yeah. But it's a phenomenon also nationally. I mean, Bernie Sanders, everybody talks about the middle class.
Yeah.
And it's lost almost. So in the council, what do you, you're the chair of the Public Housing Committee.
Yes,
That's an exciting place, right?
it is exciting.
That is in a way a very sad story.
It is.
It is.
It's both. It demonstrates what's extraordinary about our city.
The heritage of it. Yeah.
So the mayor's pursuing a housing plan.
Yeah.
He's looking to create and preserve 200,000 units over the next 10 years. And the tradition of creating affordable housing on a mass scale began with the New York City Housing Authority, in which Robert Moses had a role with his morally
I was
complicated
reading the
legacy.
history of it,
Yeah.
and I never really realized Robert Moses
did.
was the man. It was LaGuardia.
It was an authority, so-
Yeah, it was LaGuardia, and then it became right. That's
Yeah.
how it became an authority.
Yeah.
That's what he specialized in.
And we have both federal, state, we had federal, state, and city development. So every level of government had a role in the creation of public housing in New York City.
So now, it houses how many people? 500,000. No.
So NYCHA is the largest landlord in the city. NYCHA has two
Most likely in the
functions.
country. No,
It's the
I don't know, but anyway.
certainly the largest provider of affordable housing in the country and the largest provider of public housing in the continent of North America. The government might be, the Army might be the largest
Right,
landlord for all
that's
I know.
right.
So
Yeah.
but it houses a population the size of Boston, so about 600,000 residents. So between administering 88,000 Section 8 vouchers and managing 178,000 public housing units,
Section 8 is a subsidy, right?
it's a subsidy
Yeah.
that travels with the resident.
Right.
With
So
the
it's
residents.
not necessarily in the public.
Whereas in the
housing.
case of public housing, the subsidy is built into the unit.
So tell me what's happening there. The funding sources just dried up from the height of its
It
whatever
is. It
yeah,
is.
performance.
So NYCHA has faced really a perfect storm of challenges over the last 15 or 20 years. First, it's been facing disinvestment at every level of government. In 1998, the state voted to cut off all operating subsidies for public housing. In 2003, the city did the same. Since 2001, the federal government has made draconian cuts in public housing, so NYCHA is receiving a fraction of the operating and capital funds that it did only a decade ago. And all of the disinvestment is coming at a time when the public housing stock is aging dramatically. Most of the buildings are
At
either
least
at
50 years old, right?
60.
60.
Most of the buildings are either at or above the age of 60. So when you combine the aging of the public housing stock with a perfect storm of disinvestment, the result is a state of accelerated deterioration. As the conditions are getting worse and worse, the budget deficits are getting bigger and bigger, and NYCHA is caught in a financial and physical death spiral. And we have to figure out how to preserve public housing in a world of federal disinvestment.
So there's a plan.
There is a plan. There is a plan. And I want to underscore, how critical. I mean, NYCHA houses a population the size of Boston. It's 600,000 residents. And the reality is that most of the people who live in public housing, like my mother, would be homeless without it.
Right, absolutely.
It's affordable housing for the poorest New Yorkers in our city. Most of the affordable housing that we're creating today are unaffordable to the poorest New Yorkers.
Exactly. They're not. They're really middle class housing.
And so if we lose public housing, you could have hundreds of thousands of people overflowing our homeless shelters.
Homeless people.
You're concerned about 60,000?
Yeah.
Imagine hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
It could be deeply destabilizing, not only to the poor families who live in public housing, but to the city at large.
So why doesn't the national government pay more attention? Why doesn't the state government pay more attention? Why didn't the city government pay more attention? It's beyond believing. It's really, it's sinful that we have allowed that.
It's immoral.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I often tell people, for the state to vote, cut off all operating subsidies. If a private landlord one day decided, I'm no longer going to pay for the operation of my buildings, what would happen to that landlord?
And they
He would
don't
face
mind
criminal
giving, right? And
or
they
civil
don't mind
penalties.
giving tax assessments.
Exactly.
It's just distorted in our feeling of how we go about. And I think it ties in a little bit to the lack of discussion about poor people.
Yeah.
It's not.
Part of
So-
it, the discussion flows where the money flows. And, there are only two sources of power in politics. There are dollars and votes. And in public housing, you have neither dollars nor votes. And therefore, the political establishment has no incentive to care about residents in public housing and to care about the urban poor. I wish I could say that our politics is driven by moral values, but it isn't. It's driven by money and power.
But this is what I don't understand. Part of the new plan, the housing plan, is to build on vacant land in housing projects. Very controversial.
Yes.
Right?
Intensely.
But it works out that it has to have a certain amount of what they're saying. Are they saying market rate?
Market rate, yeah.
But now, and then the rest has to be affordable.
Yes.
But that affordable seemed to me to be very high.
Yes.
So,
Well, the affordability adds no benefit to public housing
Right.
because it's generating.
so is there any more public housing being built in those new buildings?
Well, public housing is seen as a discredited model.
Yeah.
It's so discredited that in 1998, I believe, the federal government effectively made it illegal to build public housing using federal funds.
Is that right?
So yes, it is, and it's financially unfeasible to create public housing without federal support. So there's effectively a moratorium on public housing development in the United States.
What do our senators have to say about that? I've never heard them
You-
discuss it.
You would have to ask them.
I think we should.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So the money from that, and it's a precarious balance because it has to have market rate housing
Yeah.
to make it worthwhile, will then go to repair and upgrade public housing,
Well, look, yes, and
which is in dire need.
I think the notion of creating a market rate development on public housing land
Yeah,
creates a visual tale of two cities.
yeah.
And you're creating it to the exclusion of a park or a
Right.
playground.
Are you
if
supporting it?
I do support
you
it.
You do.
But as a public housing resident who grew up in Throgs Neck houses,
Yeah.
who would wrestle in the park every day, if my park had been removed
Yeah.
in favor of a market rate development, it would have been devastating and traumatic.
Right.
So at the level of lived experience, I understand the intensely emotional reaction. But as a policymaker, we're receiving no resources from the federal government, no resources from the state government. Our public housing stock is in danger of disappearing within the next 10 or 20 years. We need to generate revenue, a dedicated revenue stream for NYCHA, so that we can invest in repairs.
But who's going to move into these buildings, paying a market rate when we are so concerned about crime and the conditions of the public housing buildings themselves?
Well, the crime rate varies widely depending on the public housing.
So it's not the ones with the heaviest crime rate where they're going to build.
Well, the public, well, and frankly, you could not have market rate housing in Brownsville, Brooklyn,
Right.
or in Mott Haven for now.
Yeah.
But you could have it in the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side or the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Those do have strong enough housing markets to support high rents. And the
And are
revenue-
not isolated. They're in the middle of communities.
Right.
I see. Right. So what do your constituents, what do your neighbors have to say about it? They don't like it.
There's a widespread backlash against
Yeah.
it, but when people say this is terrible, it is terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It's tragic. But what's the alternative? The alternative is demolition by neglect. And we have to use every tool at our disposal to save public housing, because if we lose it, then it will have catastrophic consequences for the poorest New Yorkers in our city.
But the contrast between these mega buildings that are going up
Yeah.
at these incredible costs, and prices to buy, and the public housing, isn't there a way to make those people really contribute to public housing?
By raising taxes?
Raising
Sure.
taxes or fees?
Well, can we pass, if we could get a tax
From the
increase,
state.
Do you
Right.
think we can get a tax increase from the state? I don't.
No. Can the city levy a fee?
Our ability to impose taxes is constrained by Albany.
Totally.
So
But
we
is
can-
a fee?
We could not, I believe the only kind of taxes that we could pass are generally applicable property taxes. If we
Exactly.
single out a class of people, it requires approval
You
from
can
the
change
state.
the grade, the
Right.
classes, but you don't do the rate. Is that what the
Exactly.
difference?
And it would require approval from Albany.
Right. But there must be a way to balance, to bring some balance between these two extremes. Anyway, we'll talk about that another time because
Yeah.
we don't have enough time to philosophize as much as I'd like to.
Look, and I think there's just a fundamental point is that rather than wait for federal funds that will never come, we have to address NYCHA's existential crisis.
It's a crisis. It is.
And
Definitely.
it requires desperate measures. These are, again, no one is pursuing market rate development as a public good. We see it as a terrible and tragic necessity for preserving public housing and creating a bondable, dedicated revenue stream. And part of it is a recognition that gentrification, if you will, is inevitable in our city. So why not capture some of the wealth created by gentrification and reinvest it in housing for poor New Yorkers?
It's an amazing challenge, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
It keeps me up at night.
You are the first person to take a committee, a housing committee, into a housing project. Did that shock you?
Yes, it did. Like, we never held a city council hearing in a public housing development, and we seldom hold them outside City Hall. I said, the goal, because I'm sure you've seen the media coverage and the publicity around participatory budgeting, but as far as I'm concerned, participatory budgeting should be part of a much broader vision of participatory government, which includes bringing committee hearings, bringing the government directly to the people.
Also, having hearings at a time when people can come.
Exactly. And so that people have an opportunity to testify. And normally at a city council hearing, it's held at City Hall, and the agency testifies first, and then testifies for 4 hours. And by the time everyday people get to testify, all the council members have left. And I said, not in my hearing.
Yeah.
In my hearing, the tenants will testify first, the agency will wait.
Good for you. But you also are talking a lot to young people. You have a youth council?
We were able to create a youth city council. So as I said earlier, I'm a product of the Coro program. And so I partnered with the Coro program and the Speaker's office and my colleagues in the council to create a New York City Youth Council. So each council member has a junior council member.
That's very good.
Yes,
Yeah.
who will immerse themselves in the workings of the city council, land use, oversight hearings, budgeting, constituent
And
services.
then will they eventually have their own, like a UN, like the United Nations does with having a model assembly? Will you have a model council meeting? Might.
There might be. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a new program, and we are inventing and reinventing it. But I see it as just the latest investment that we're making in youth civic engagement. For me, youth civic engagement is critical.
And you also want to have younger people on community boards.
Yes, I am in favor of 16-year-olds on community boards.
So is there a rule that says you can't be on a community board if you're under the age of 21?
I believe there was a change in state law that allows for 16-year-olds on community boards. But
So-
before,
Yeah.
I forget what I think it was public. There was some
be a
there was
voter
some
or something, yeah.
category of state law
Yeah.
that limited community board membership to 18.
So
Or
you're
older.
really going, we're at the end of this program, that's why I'm
Okay.
pushing you a little bit. You're really going deep into what's behind us to hopefully bring more people into this whole process.
You know, look, as I said, I represent 165,000 residents, and yet only 6,000 vote. And so in some sense, I ask myself, am I truly a representative of my district? Do we truly live in a representative democracy? And so if we want to create democracy in the truest sense of the word, we have to cultivate the next generation of politically and civically engaged young leaders. And so that's the driving force behind
It's certainly,
mission.
It's certainly a paramount importance.
I think it is the central public good from which everything else will flow.
And you go to schools and talk to students?
I did a lecture on NYU a few days ago on public housing. I partner with Generation Citizen to bring civics to high school classes and speak about my own experiences in the classroom. I speak to young men of color in particular to show them that I'm an example of what is possible, that I've gone through many of the struggles that they're facing in their own lives, and that they can make it.
So you don't think ahead about what you're going to do? You have 6 more years in the city council.
I reckon that I should focus on
What?
doing the job that I can do, and everything else will follow. I truly believe that. I
Well,
think ultimately politics rewards achievement.
I'm sure that everything that follows is going to be very good. And
I can
Richie
only
Torres, we're going to be watching.
Please do.
Thank you
Cheer
so
me
much.
on, please.
I will, definitely. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you.